My name is Brook Hedge, and I'm a photographer. I seek to capture life and emotions through the lens. I started when I was a teenager, and I've now been devoting pretty much full time for the last 14 years. People often ask me, as they ask many artists, what's your inspiration? What's your vision? Do you have a theme? And I have friends who have spent their entire careers photographing one particular aspect, but in so many different ways. I have a friend who's worldwide known for her nudes. And for 50 years, she has done nudes in different fashions. But it's always basically the same thing. And maybe it's a disability of mine, but I am a generalist. And my inspiration is in what I see, what I feel, and what sort of grabs me by the gut. Now, that may be partially because I had a long career in the law where I was a generalist, and I think it's just carried over that I don't specialize in any one thing. So with these pictures, for example, of the women in various positions, what grabbed me about it was sort of the otherworldly feeling, a sort of a sense of mystery. It presents a story. It's not just a straight portrait of somebody. And I can walk around and see a nature scene, and somehow it becomes like a person. It's a metaphor for some emotion that we feel as humans. And I think that's what I'm trying to capture, is really the emotional level that we feel inside and elsewhere. What we show the world, what we feel about what's going on around us. So that in some ways all of these are statements, or they're meant to evoke emotion. So what I'm really saying is it's the interplay of light. It's allowing light to allow for expressions that we might not otherwise see or feel. It's about shadows, it's about textures. So for example, with this, part of the mystery of this is the sort of texture in the background and the darkness contrast of the hat and the vision. And the darkness is actually just the background of the floor on which the shadow falls. But when I saw it, what I saw was a stark black and white, an emotion of what was this woman doing? What was she thinking? Where was she going? What was happening? And the same with the one on the end, with the head within a head. What's the emotion that's going on? We all have voices in our heads, and that was an example of using just light, shadows, and textures to say, how do you bring forth that emotion on just a piece of paper? So that you can take a portrait of somebody and you can get emotion in a portrait, especially a really well done portrait, but trying to look for something a little bit different where the emotion comes right to the surface with what you're looking at. Another thing when I'm shooting or when I'm then framing things, I like to make people think. I like to present things in a way that's a little bit different sometimes, because that's what makes the difference between a snapshot and a photograph. It causes people to take a second, third, fourth look and say, what's being said? How does that relate to me? What was the artist trying to say? And this is an example. I was sitting on the Sandwich Beach, and these loons were taking a break from their children, I suspect. And they were just floating. They weren't fishing. They were just having an afternoon nap. And they didn't mind me. I wasn't that far from them. But I just watched. I ran home, got my telephoto lens, and came back talking about tools. That's the one I would use for this. And I just watched him and shot. And this little guy decided to take a nap. And the water was so still, it was a perfect reflection. And when you see it up close, the lines of the water are vertical. The coloration from the sun coming through presented this pattern of almost a tapestry of horsemen. I actually have horsehair seats on my dining room table chairs, and it was exactly the same color and the same pattern, which matched the verticality of the loon. Now, everyone comes in, and they want to go like this. Now, that's your classic loon picture and classic reflection that everybody looks for. But I wanted it this way because I was emphasizing the textures and the feel of both the loon, the water, and how integrated they were in nature. And just to give it more thought and just stop and take a look and think about it. So that is one example of just trying to present something in a different light. With this one called Detached, what I looked down and saw were leaves floating and the shadow of a tree limb that was floating in the water. But we all have had to let go of things. We've all had to dismiss something or say goodbye to something. Does this tree feel something when it's saying goodbye to its leaves? And I looked at it and I thought that too is a metaphor for life, where we all look at things in a different way when we say goodbye, and nature does as well. This is an example of what I'm referring to with seeing something in nature that brings forth an emotion. We've all grabbed something that is, we're hanging on for dear life, that our knuckles are going white. So I was going through the garden and I saw this leaf of a hosta bush going over the stem, and that's what struck me. It was like any time in life you've held on for dear life. And this leaf is on its last legs, about to say goodbye at the end of the summer, and yet it's holding on. And that's what I mean about looking at nature and not just taking a straight nature shot, but trying to infuse or see within it the emotion that's there. And that to me is probably one of the best examples of it. So people say to me, well, what do you use? Do you have different techniques for different things? And if I'm shooting something where I'm evoking emotion like that, I'm more often than not going to a camera that either produces just black and white, or I know in the end I will use a camera that is good for converting color to black and white. Or I will go to one that really is vivid in color. The story's about color, then I'll go to color. So, for example, even with these leaves, it was the contrast of the orange against the blues that made it stand out and pop. Had I converted that to black and white, it wouldn't have the soulfulness, it wouldn't have evoked the same emotion. So that the technique is one of just what I see. I don't do very much, I don't even want to say post-processing, I say articulation, because what I'm really doing when I go to the computer is to say, what did I see? What am I trying to communicate? What am I saying? And so that's why I say I'm articulating the image, much as a painter would do with a brush, so that I will pull a different brush, I'll pull a different camera, I'll pull a different texture or software to be able to give life to what I'm trying to express in the photo, as opposed to just taking a straight landscape shot or pulling out my iPhone or just capturing the moment, because you're freezing a moment in time. And iPhones are great for that. And I've even taken some iPhone pictures and then articulated them to say something else. But I'm using tools that allow me the creativity, such as multiple exposures, to be able to present an emotion in a different way because I can do it in one frame. So just like a painter would look to a different type of paper, I look to a different type of paper when I'm printing the images. I look to a different type of brush with my cameras and my lenses. Do I want to compress the scene? Do I want to make it open and wide? All of that goes into the calculus of what lens am I going to pick and which camera am I going to put the lens on. I shoot basically with Nikon and with Leica, and I've gone more and more to my Leica, which is what I was raised with 60 years ago with an M3. And the clarity of the lenses is fantastic, but so are Nikon's. And Nikon gives me the flexibility of telephoto lenses that help compress a scene and compress a space, that give a whole different feel to the photograph, just as an artist with a pen or a pencil or a brush would give on their feel as to their depth that they're bringing into their pictures. So this picture sells, which actually was created during the Me Too movement initially. And I first named it that, and then I thought, it's too stark. But it really is about selves, and that's what I thought of when I shot it. And this is an example of tools and techniques to express a special motion that can not otherwise really be expressed. It's a multiple exposure done 3 times with the model sitting in the middle. This was at the Rudyard Kipling estate in Vermont, in the sitting room upstairs. And I had her sit in the middle of the couch, and then she was a very good model, and then I had her sit to the left of herself. Of course, she couldn't see it. I had her sit to the left and said, remember where you were, remember your position. And then I said, remember how you had your head and your legs. So after I shot it again, I had her move to the other side and replicate that same position. I could only see in the back of my camera, because it was digital, it wasn't film at this point. I could only see the picture from the center, so I had to just hope that she got it right going to each side, and she nailed it. She got it perfectly. But to me, because with the multiple exposures in one frame, it wasn't composited in Photoshop or anything like that, you see the couch through it, and that to me said some of the emotion. It was like seeing through people. It was your emotions of many different colors and stripes that we all hold internally and mull over. And you're never quite sure how they resolve, but they're all there, and that's her three selves, with the couch coming through and being transparent. And a lot of times people feel other people see through them, and that was also a metaphor for that as well. But that's an example of the type of technique you can do with the brush of a camera. Often people will come to the gallery or come up to me and say, oh, I could take that with an iPhone. One photo that I have called Fireworks, that's very vibrant fall colors. Well, you think you could pass by and take it with an iPhone, but you really can't. It's a Leica lens that makes all the colors pop, and with some articulation, but not oversaturating, because I don't believe in that. I want to have it look like what I saw. You just can't capture it the same way. iPhones take great shots, but they can't take certain shots. And so this is an example of one that is an iPhone shot. But if you saw the shot that I took, it's very different. First of all, there was a man sitting over here who was with the woman in the right side of the picture, and they were talking. But for a moment, she drifted off, and I happened to walk out the door and watched her for a second. She wasn't paying me any attention, and I just turned my iPhone on her and clicked it. And then later, in what I would call my digital darkroom, I started to work on the photo to do what I used to do in the darkroom, because I started out in black and white photography, rolling my own film, just my film, and did it in the darkroom with dodging and burning and being able to bring out the highlights and the shadows of various pictures. And that's what I did here. I took away some of the things that were really bright and taking it away. What I wanted to focus on was her look of just what next? And that's what I called the photo, what next? So it was an iPhone shot, but it wasn't just right out of the camera, as we call straight out of the camera. I worked with it as a painter would take a brush and do more to bring out colors or make colors recede. I did it as I would have done in the darkroom, with making things fade into the background or come to the fore. So when people say, oh, I could take that with an iPhone, maybe as a basic shot, but you have to do more than that to make it a photograph as opposed to a snapshot. I think the most common question I get asked is, well, often, how did I do the photograph, such as the one with cells with the three pictures of the woman on the couch, or what was I feeling, what was I trying to say in the photograph? Often it's interesting to stand back and hear people look at the work and express their own reactions to it. And I've learned not, unless they ask me, I won't say what I was doing, because you want the person to relate to the picture as it relates to them, what they see in it and how they come to terms with that photograph. And it's often very different than what I started out with or what I was shooting in my mind. So asking me, what was I seeing is not always the right answer. It's what does the viewer see? What does it mean to them? And that's what I tell them, because it has to be personal to them. Sometimes I'm making a statement, but not usually. It's the interplay of light, it's shadows, it's the textures, it's communicating inner emotions, as I've said with these pieces, and it's what happens with the next. And that to me is essential. That's the voice. It allows me a voice that's other than writing. I've become a very visual person that way after years and years of just writing at length. And this is just a way to see my world and have others try to see it, not necessarily the same way, but to look at the world differently. And if I manage to do that, then I've contributed something.